ASKA and Medieval Dynasty both belong to a small but growing genre of multiplayer survival crafting games where you build villages, recruit villagers, and manage their daily work. Each game has its strengths, and more than once I've caught myself wishing features from one game carried over to the other. So in this video, we're going to break down their core systems and how they stack up against each other, highlighting where each game shines and where it falls short. Starting with... Visually, ASKA leans to a more colorful and cartoony style, and that's not necessarily a negative aspect. I think it fits well with the game's mythic and fantasy themes. Medieval Dynasty, on the other hand, takes the opposite approach, grounding its visuals in realism to create the feeling of living in a true medieval world. Medieval Dynasty is built in Unreal 4, while ASKA is built with Unity, and they both run just fine. They do have the similar problem though that as your village progresses and gets larger, you may lose some frames, especially if you're playing like multiplayer. And any gaming laptop or PC from the past 5 years should have no trouble running either of these. Now interestingly, ASKA's minimum requirements are about the same as Medieval Dynasty's recommended specs. So when it comes to overall visual appeal and performance balance, it's close enough that I'd just call it a tie. When it comes to UI, Medieval Dynasty is definitely cleaner and more intuitive of the two. The only thing that's been bugging me a little bit lately is the crafting wheel. It's starting to feel a bit cluttered now since so many new items have been added over time. ASKA's UI though, it's kind of just all over the place. Some of it feels confusing to work around, but I do like that it shows your keybinds on the screen. It's actually a nice touch, especially when you're learning the controls, and you can turn it off once you get everything down. The management side of ASKA's UI works, but in my opinion it's a little clunky. There are way too many tabs, sections, and numbers you need to input that will break up the flow. I feel like Medieval Dynasty has had years to smooth out these rough edges, and you can really tell. I think ASKA will get better over time, but right now, Medieval Dynasty's UI is just way easier to navigate. Medieval Dynasty's world is handcrafted, so every run takes place on the same map. You always know where things are going to be, but that also adds for a bit more visual storytelling. There are random camps that will spawn each season, and points of interest that will make the world feel alive and fresh on new playthroughs. Now ASKA goes the opposite route with procedurally generated maps based on seeds. That means sometimes you might roll a bad seed, but having a new map every time for a new playthrough will definitely feel more fresh, especially if you're the type to restart and try new runs a lot. For pure replayability, ASKA definitely has this edge. The two maps that Medieval Dynasty has are beautiful, but like I said, it's more static. And sure, you can change things up by building in a different spot, but at the end of the day, you're gonna still be on the same map. Personally, I really enjoy the variety you get from the procedural generation, so I'm gonna give this one to ASKA. Medieval Dynasty's world feels a lot more fleshed out when it comes to story. Both maps have their own main storyline, plus plenty of side quests tied to the villagers living there. That level of detail adds to the immersion and makes the world feel way more alive. Another big thing that Medieval Dynasty has and ASKA doesn't is the family and heir mechanic. Over time, your villagers will age, they'll get married, they can have children, and eventually you can pass your settlement down to your heir. Once your heir turns 18, you can take over and continue the story as them, which gives the game a real sense of legacy. If you're expecting something like that in ASKA, you might be a little disappointed. ASKA by comparison doesn't really have much of a story yet. There's bits of visual storytelling in some locations and encounters, but nothing that really drives you forward. Hopefully that's something they want to build on in future updates. More story locations, random travelers or nomads, maybe even a quest system beyond the gods' favors. Right now it feels pretty similar to Conan Exile's journey system, if you know what that is. And maybe that's just the trade-off with procedural generation. But in terms of story and world building, this one goes to Medieval Dynasty. In ASKA, you only get two characters to choose from, ASKA and Ragnar, and their skills are fixed. I'm not a huge fan of that since it locks your abilities based on who you play. There are some cosmetic options, hairstyles, beards, eyes, hair color, tattoos, as well as more hair options once you play the game and unlock them through the god favors. Medieval Dynasty's customization, on the other hand, gives you way more freedom in character creation. You can change hair, skin tone, scars, eyebrows, facial hair, eye color, freckles. It just has a lot more depth. Both games could definitely expand on the customization in the future, but Medieval clearly has the edge right now. Combat in ASKA definitely feels better, and there's a whole lot more situations where combat comes in. You'll run into more encounters, more enemy types, you've got mechanics like dodging, you'll have bosses, invasions, as well as raids to keep you on your toes. If you're not big on combat though, there's a setting that tones things down a bit so you can play at a more relaxed pace. Much more on the levels of like Medieval Dynasty. Now I've mentioned it before, but Medieval Dynasty's combat feels a little bit more of like an afterthought. It works, it gets the job done, but it's not really the focus of the game. I will say I prefer Medieval Dynasty's ranged weapons over ASKA. The bows and the crossbows just feel really solid. But when it comes down to melee, ASKA is miles ahead. If combat is an important part to the experience for you, ASKA is the clear winner here. In ASKA, villagers are a lot more self-sufficient compared to Medieval Dynasty. They'll feed themselves, warm themselves when needed, and they'll even go out to look for food, water, or firewood if supplies are low. Accidents can still happen though, especially during the winter, and villagers can die, unlike your villagers in Medieval Dynasty. But thanks to the Eye of Odin, they can be revived, so it's not always a permanent setback. One of my favorite features in ASKA is actually the villagers will come with random traits when you summon them, which gives them a bit more personality. These traits could be better farmers, better miners, they prefer working in the day or the night, they prefer working during winter, maybe they have more resilience during the winter, and you only know 2 of their skills before summoning them, and then after you summon them, the last 3 skills will be revealed. Another really cool thing is that you can adjust their sleep schedules, so you can have people working days, night shifts, or even just like odd hours. The system was a little confusing at first to me, but overall I really like the flexibility. Your villagers will also level up in tiers, so as they get stronger, they're going to want higher quality foods to stay happy. This is a feature that I'd love to see be added to Medieval Dynasty. There's a lot of high quality foods and drinks in Medieval Dynasty where it's not really necessary to give them to your villagers. You could literally just give them cabbage and water for the rest of their life. And I think it would be nice if Medieval Dynasty added something like this where the higher skilled your villagers are, the more they have demands in terms of like food, housing, or even beverages and alcohol. Now when it comes to jobs, ASKA keeps things simple. Once you assign a role, villagers will handle all of the steps on their own. The only thing you really need to worry about is crafting their tools or assigning other villagers to make them. You do have a task system, and one of the really nice things about tasks is if there is a specific piece that they need to make something that you set in their tasks, you don't have to have another villager make that item before setting that task. The villagers will just make all the prerequisites if it's possible in their building, which makes running the workshops really, really nice. In terms of gathering, you can also set priorities for what resources you prefer them to gather, which gives you a lot of control there. And if a villager doesn't have a job, they'll automatically default to building duties, like keeping fires going, hauling resources, or helping construct buildings. In Medieval, the villagers aren't quite as independent, so without storage buildings like food and resource storage, they won't really sustain themselves. Even if there's literally running water right next to their house, they won't go get it unless it's in the designated storage spot. Tools work about the same way in both games though. You either craft them yourself or you have your villagers do it for you. Overall, managing villagers in Medieval Dynasty is a whole lot easier to master. There's a bit less to manage, and I feel like it's had a lot more time to refine these systems. At the same time, I really like the levels of control ASKA gives me. In terms of management, both do a really good job, but I'm gonna give this one to ASKA. Building in ASKA is way more extensive than in Medieval Dynasty. You've got tons of add-ons and customization options, which is awesome, but the trade-off is that construction is gonna take way longer. Medieval's building system is just simpler and faster, which makes it more beginner-friendly to me. One thing I do love in ASKA is how the roads look, but building them is just a pain compared to Medieval. You have to place down like small sections one at a time, and then plow each piece individually. Medieval's drag and drop system is a whole lot smoother. That said, ASKA's roads actually have a gameplay benefit in that running on them will drain your stamina less, compared to Medieval where they're purely just cosmetic and the villagers don't always use them. Now crafting in ASKA is decent overall, but the cooking system tripped me up at first. Recipes aren't always clear, and the resource grind feels heavier. Once you start working with iron and hardwood, the number of beams, smelting steps, and unique pieces can get overly complicated in my opinion. Thankfully with the villagers helping out, it's not too painful. Storage is another area where I feel like ASKA feels over-designed. You've got tons of warehouse buildings and containers to manage, and it's easy to overfill them with junk or things that you just do not need. Medieval Dynasty keeps it simple with just 2 main storage buildings, and some might say it's too basic, but honestly I prefer the simplicity over micromanaging dozens of chests. So yeah, in this category, I don't think there's a clear winner. ASKA gives you depth and detail, but Medieval wins on simplicity and ease of use. It really depends on what you value more here. Also, before I forget, for all the decorators out there, there are decorations in ASKA that you can use, and they do have function like increasing area desirability, which makes your villagers happier. Now granted, there isn't that many decorations I think in comparison to Medieval Dynasty, so I think I prefer the decoration aspects in Medieval over ASKA. Farming in ASKA isn't drastically different compared to Medieval Dynasty, but it is just as important. You'll still need tools like hoes, rakes, composts, and seed bags, and both games have seasonal crop rotations. The main differences are in the details though. Medieval's fields are much larger, which means bigger harvests, while ASKA's fields are smaller but still give solid yields. Compost or fertilizer is also optional in ASKA. It'll just boost your output, and you really need to build a farm structure before you can even place your fields. If you play both games, many of the crops are going to be familiar. You're gonna have flax, cabbage, carrots, beets, onions, though each game throws in a few unique ones like poppies in Medieval or garlic in ASKA. Overall, I would say ASKA's farming leads more towards set and forget, since villagers will take care of most of the work once you set it up. Medieval gives you more control in terms of farming, and if you invest in the right skills, you can really crank up your yields if you help out. Farming is one of my favorite systems in Medieval Dynasty, so I'll admit I'm biased here, but even with that, I'd say Medieval's farming goes a bit deeper, while ASKA's is perfectly fine for a more hands-off approach. Oh, and before I forget, animal husbandry exists in both games, but is definitely more fleshed out in Medieval, with more animals and the mounts. ASKA only has a few animals you can farm like the smokers, but you can tame wolf pups, which I think is awesome. Now, progression works a little bit differently in both games, but at the end of the day, they both come with a grind. In ASKA, unlocking new buildings is tied to what you've already constructed. If you want to unlock more advanced structures, you're going to need to have the required buildings already in place. That's going to take time, and since building in ASKA is slower, it can feel like a hurdle. Thankfully, villagers will help you out, which will make the grind a lot more manageable. Medieval Dynasty's progression is a little bit simpler when it comes to construction, but instead of unlocking through the building chains, it's more tied to crafting and getting tech points through that. You and your villagers have to craft constantly to unlock higher tier buildings, which can turn it into its own grind. Now, skills also play a big role in both games. In ASKA, you and your villagers will gain efficiency as they level up in their jobs, which will feel really rewarding over time. In Medieval, villagers also get better as they level up, but the player has more direct perks to unlock, things like higher yields, carry weight, more health, faster crafting, things like that. Speaking of skills, one of the skills in Medieval Dynasty is Survival Sense, which allows you to see basically all of the resources, herbs, or even animals roaming around. And in ASKA, you just start with that at the start of the game, which is super convenient. Personally, I prefer Medieval's skill system for the player since you feel like you're directly shaping how your character develops. But in terms of overall progression, I think ASKA has the edge here. Its progression feels a lot more earned, like every step forward is a big achievement. So does this mean ASKA is better than Medieval Dynasty? Honestly, like with most of these comparisons I've made, it really comes down to your taste. If you want a grittier Norse-inspired village builder with more combat, raids, and survival elements, ASKA is absolutely worth checking out. But if you prefer a more laid-back, immersive survival-like experience with family systems in a grounded medieval world, then Medieval Dynasty is probably your best fit. Now, if you're like me and you just like village management games as well as survival crafting games, I think you're gonna like both of them a lot. Now, if you want to see some more of ASKA, I'll leave a link on the screen of my live playthrough, and right next to that, you can also check out my latest Medieval Dynasty run. But until next time, y'all, thanks for watching, and take care.